Hello, hello, hello. Emma Howitt here, Pure Abodes, and I am extremely excited to have Suzanne Smith here of multiple things to do with being a landlord, and I'm going to ask her to explain all of those things over the next hour. I am really, really excited to have Suzanne here purely from a selfish perspective, is because I come from being a serviced accommodation provider. And so I have never actually had a tenant until, well, shortly. I'm doing something called a rent to buy, where somebody is going to rent my property over a long haul and then will eventually buy it from me. So I'm going to have a tenant. So I thought, and Suzanne is actually relatively local to me. We've been at networking events together. And when she first started talking to me and what she did, I was like, wow, incredible. She's literally a walking mine of incredible information. So I'm really thrilled to have Suzanne on here. So welcome, Suzanne. How are you this morning?
I'm very well. The sun is shining. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, look, for those people who might not have heard of you before, just give us a little bit of background about yourself.
So my name's Suzanne Smith, and until 5 years ago, I was a corporate lawyer. I worked in the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, and then retired when I got to 51. And that's when I started thinking about becoming a landlord, although technically I'd thought about it beforehand because I already had an investment property that I'd been living in for work purposes. And so I became a landlord 5 years ago. I went through that steep learning curve that you're talking about. And because I'm a lawyer and I can't kind of switch off, even though I'm not technically a lawyer. Well, no, I'm still a solicitor. I'm just not practicing. But you can't entirely switch off. As I began to learn about becoming a landlord, I started to think, well, I should share this because I found it really difficult to find good independent advice about being a landlord, because most of what you see out there is a sales funnel. And a lot of the blogs are run either by letting agents or by service companies. And I thought, well, why don't I set up a blog that's totally free, nothing behind a paywall. I don't do coaching. I don't do mentoring. I'm doing it to pay forward and to help landlords become good landlords, and to, from starting all the way through scaling up. And then that's good for the private rented sector. It means that when people search for something on Google, I'll be there, hopefully, and there'll be sensible advice that they can rely on. And so I've been going I set it up August 2022, so not yet 2 years. And I do a new blog post each week, and I do a newsletter each week, which has getting on for 5,000 subscribers. Is all totally free. And recently I've set up a podcast with somebody called Richard Jackson, who is he runs Alphalets, the property management software. And we've set it up. It's called Good Landlording. It started 6 weeks ago, and we've already had almost 10,000 downloads, which is incredible for a podcast. And because what we're talking about isn't we're not moaning about the state of the PRS or moaning about this and moaning about that, because I get fed up with all the moaning that's going on. It's like, okay, we're landlords. What do we do? How do we pick good tenants? What do we do if they fall into rent arrears? How do we set rents? What all of these kind of practical things that is actually surprisingly difficult to get information about. So there you go. That's it.
I love it. I love it. And anyone, if you've got any questions for Suzanne, do chuck them in and we'll try and answer them ongoing. And we will obviously put some links in the comments so that you can help you find all these things. So absolutely, I've been listening to your brand new podcast. I am a huge fan of podcasts, and yours is fabulous. It's really great to listen to. You do these nice short chunks, kind of 20 minutes. So it's really great for me to do them on the school run. And you do give great information. And exactly as it made me laugh when you said not moaning. I know when you go to like the NRLA, so the National Residential Landlords Association, they tend to be a pit of this just quagmire of misery about how terrible everyone's lot is and how awful it is. And but actually, when you tend to go to more of the property networking events, they tend to be a bit more upbeat. People are solution focused, and that's what I really love about what you're offering. Is it's kind of that merging of the both. You understand that there are issues, but you're bringing solutions as well, and it's really refreshing.
And what I find with all the property investment stuff is it's not on being a landlord, because that's the boring stuff. It's like, if you're looking at business, these property investment things are M&A, mergers and acquisitions. They're the exciting thing, you know, how you get your money, how you invest, all that sort of thing. And then when you get, and even like some of the big people who do HMO content, very few of them actually talk about the HMO management regulations and what you have to do, how often you have to inspect and all that sort of thing. That's in the business world, it's called operations. And, you know, operations is a bit boring. People find it boring, but it's actually crucial, because if you're going to make money as a landlord and be a good landlord and not have hassle from tenants and have good tenants, then you need to know how to do it. And so I saw this real gap when I went through that learning curve myself, and to try and help people to be good at being a landlord. And then everyone's happy. You've got happy tenants, they look after your property, and then you make a little bit of money.
Yeah, I love that. And it was, in fact, the next point I was going to raise is that I think you're absolutely right. In these, a lot of training companies, there is this kind of always this talk of passive income, and not quite sure that exactly is right.
Can I just stop you there? I mean, it's a trigger word for me, passive income. And, you know, it really is, because being a landlord is not passive. Because if you want to make it more passive, then it means you have to employ people to do things. You employ sources, you employ people to manage the refurbs, you employ letting agents. And because most of the yields in the UK, 6-7%, you might get a little bit more, but then they tend to be in parts of the country where you're only going to be earning 100 or 200 quid a month anyway, so it's probably not worth it. And so they talk about this passive income, but it is not. And there's another thing they talk about, mindset. And I think mindset's important, but not the kind of manifesting mindset that people go on about. It's the mindset that it's a business, it's a low margin business, and you need to manage it really closely. That's the mindset. It is not passive income. If you want passive income with interest rates around 5% at the moment, put your money in the bank, because you'll have a lot less aggravation and you won't lose money, which you can lose money as a landlord. There are plenty of people who are losing money as landlords at the moment. So sorry, I interrupted you, but passive income.
Exactly. And I think it, like all these things, you know, you want to be as clear as possible. But I think when they sort of go down that route, exactly as you said, they talk, you know, basically about getting everyone else to do it. So you know,
including them, and giving them money for like tens of thousands for their mentoring and masterminds and courses.
Exactly. So it's all about sort of letting other people take over it. So it would be like your letting agents and all of those things. But that's the biggest thing that I've certainly learned on my journey, is that you can hand over a lot of stuff, but inherently you still need to understand it. And I always say that. So, you know, I work in serviced accommodation, and it's a huge thing. I say to them, you can hand it over to a management company to run your property as serviced accommodation, but you still need to understand it. You need to know that you've got the right area and it works really well, that you understand how a business runs, so that when they're coming back to you and making all these recommendations, that you know that it's correct or not. And that's what I loved about, in fact, this morning I was listening to one of your podcasts, and Richard, isn't it? Yeah, sorry, yes. Richard. He mentioned, and you followed up, that even having a conversation with a letting agent, that you should actually write notes. And it's little things like this that are so key, that most of us that come in are really new to property. We perhaps, you know, build up a small portfolio or a big portfolio if you can, and you then want to hand it over. It's so important to not just hand it over. It's to have all this insight, all this knowledge. And you both, with considerable years experience under your belt, you know, I can see that you're even learning along the way. It's kind of like, okay, well, that's never happened to me, but I've learned from you as well. So yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting. So.
And that's what I really love doing, not doing a podcast by myself, it's good to have another landlord to do it. He does flats and I do houses, and we have slightly different view of the world, but we still want to be good landlords. So we're coming at it from that angle. And the thing is with letting agents is people don't realize that anyone can set up as a letting agent, even if unless they're a criminal, and they don't need any qualifications. So, you could have an 18-year-old kid who's straight out of school and is a letting agent. And even if they are working for letting agents that are members of Property Mark, the actual individual letting agents don't have to be members of Property Mark. They don't have to have had their level 3 training. And unfortunately, and I've discovered this myself, that the quality really varies. Even within the same estate agency, I used one in Maidstone when I first started. They were really good. And then there was a change of personnel and they were awful. And that is indirectly what led to me setting up the Independent Landlord, because they made a lot of mistakes. They were expensive. And so if you're going to make a success of being a landlord and you use letting agents, you need to manage them. And I say that you should go on an inspection once a year with the letting agents. You can't trust anyone, actually. I think having seen this myself, and even if they're good, it's good to keep them on their toes. It's not micromanaging. It's just checking. It's just checking what they're doing. So the other thing about, well, you'll know this from the podcast, if you're going to enter into a contract with a letting agent, read it. Because I would say about 75% of them try to lock in landlords and make it really difficult to terminate. So if you're not happy, even if they're not kind of making mistakes, but they're just a bit rubbish, it's really hard to get out of it. So at the start, just as you would negotiate the price when you buy a property, negotiate the terms and the fees with the letting agents. But sometimes it's worth paying a little bit more to get better quality. But the problem is you don't know if they're any good until you try them. And that's what's really hard. That's why you need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. And actually going back to the point that you mentioned earlier, which was really key, you said something about, like any business, you have the operations side. And I think that is something that I talk a lot about. There's another fantastic developer, Paul Merrick. He talks a lot about, remembering that this really is a business. Yes. And treat it as a business. And of course, when you think of it more from a business perspective, for me, a lot about what I think about in the products, I suppose, that I'm offering is, is this a good product? Is the service that they're receiving a good service? And I'm certainly learning that at the moment. I'm doing a self-find, so I'm using Open Rent. But I'd be really keen to sort of understand, and I hope this is not too much of a big question, we'll filter down, but what do you think inherently makes a good landlord?
Okay, a good landlord, you have a good product, as you say, you have a really good property, and you don't penny pinch when it comes to repairs. You look after it. It's an asset. So, but like I have new tenants. I'm going to be looking for new tenants myself in about a month's time. I'm going to go in. I'm not going to try and let it while the tenants are there. I'm going to do some repairs, and I've been on a plumbing course. So I'm going to put in a new sink and change the taps in the kitchen, do some retiling, and I'm going on another course to do that because it all helps the margins. So a good landlord is somebody who treats their tenants fairly and is reasonable. And I think, unfortunately, there are some landlords who don't do that. And a good landlord is somebody who complies with the spirit and intent of the law. I'll give you an example. It's compulsory to do a gas safety certificate once a year. We all know that. But it's not technically compulsory to service the boiler. A good landlord services the boiler because it looks after the boiler and it looks after the safety of the tenants. And I bought a property a couple of years ago and the boiler had never been serviced, which is like, and you get landlords who kind of penny pinch on this. And so another thing is you need to have enough money behind you for when things go wrong. And so that doesn't just mean putting 10% aside for repairs each year, but you should have at least another 10% as well. So that means putting 20% aside a year, because boilers go wrong and a roof needs fixing. there's some problem. And you know, I certainly spend more than 10% a year on maintenance across my portfolio, and that's probably why I'm trying to learn how to do more myself. But so I think a good landlord is somebody. It's like the golden rule. If you had grown up children, how would you want their landlord to be? And I certainly, my own children who are in their mid-20s, they've informed me what it's like being a tenant in today's world, and that certainly informs a lot of my content. And so that's what I think being a good landlord is.